Hello and welcome to the second annual memorial conference honoring Hoshang's older sister, actually. I'm Firuze Kapan Mateen. I'm a friend of Professor Merchant, and I'm also here conducting research towards the completion of my area of study is aspects of Islamic heritage of the Delhi. I'm going to introduce a book that is called Fire Altar, a place of sacrifice and prophecies that are uttered as poetic riddles. The altar was meant for violence and for purging violence through fire, cleansing the soul of the sinners, the rulers who came there to revive their might and wage anew wars against their kins and enemies of neighboring and far-off lands. The altar, the fire altar, was the ancient locus for reaching to the heavens, the portal for connecting the mortals and the gods in life and also in death. It was the place for awakening the fire within and honoring the mystery of being. Fire altar, the nexus for Zoroastrian rituals, is the title of Kekavus's collection of poetry. A Parsi, a historian, and a poet, he has come to the father of history, to Herodotus, who first spoke poetically of the ancient civilizations that entangled with each other in glory's vein. It was Herodotus who spoke of the first monotheistic religion, Zoroastrianism, and of the Egyptians who gave names to the gods that his forefathers were worshipping namelessly. Kekavus Daruwala explains that he was considering a collection of poetry on the Parsi since the late 1980s. This thought gained color as he studied the portrayal of the ancient Persians in the work of the Greek historian and the versified epic of the kings of ancient Persia in the Shahnameh, the Book of the Kings, by the 10th century Ferdowsi. The latter resided on the fringes of the territory that had seen the flight of his Zoroastrian compatriots to Gujarat a few centuries earlier. In a land ruled by foreign invaders, Ferdowsi's aim was to rescue a language and a history that would have been vanished forever. Herodotus seemed more empirical. He visited the battlefield where the Persians defeated the Egyptians. He saw the skulls of the Persians gathered on one side and those of the Egyptians on the other, and passed a judgment on their composition on the ground of their exposure to the sun. Kekavus, a historian poet of our epoch, looks at this past and this tradition as a seer, a Zoroastrian priest, a clever court historian with insight into the thoughts of kings even after they're gone. In a representative poem, Cambyses on Herodotus, he explains how the dead emperor Cambyses, who witnessed his own end in a vision, which he misinterpreted to his demise, looked at the historian from the realm of death. Cambyses could be standing at the Shirawat bridge, the Zoroastrian passage to heaven or hell, depending on the sins committed against one's soul. From this perspective, Keki echoes the words of the Persian emperor, who, reviewing his past, this history, mockingly explains, to prove his empiric bent at the battlefield where we beat the Egyptians, he tests the skulls. The Persian ones, heaped in one big mound, yield to pebble touch and crack. The others you can't smite open with a stone. Egyptian skulls are thick. That's how this historian rants. And yet they believed him, the gods above, and I stayed trapped upon this sinful earth. The stance on this sinful earth invokes revisiting history, not any history, but that of the early Occidental civilization, observing with an intrusive intent the rest of the world. This is the history that the poetic narrator objects even the gods vouch for as the truth. I would like to invite Kekavus Daruwala to the podium to introduce this valuable collection of poetry, or if he prefers to sit on his seat, whichever is his preference. Please welcome Kekavus.
Many thanks, Dr. Firuze Papa Mateen, for this very fulsome introduction. Many thanks. I also stand privileged to be here. I attended the first Wahhabis lecture, which was a very fine evening in Delhi, and I'm sure this should be a repeat. So, Dr. Rukmini Bhaya Nair and Dr. Hoshang Merchant, I've been asked to speak a little about the book and read 2 or 3 sonnets at the very most. We are really short of time. This book came about because I was asked to write a book on the Parsis. I managed to buy a second-hand book on Herodotus from a second-hand bookshop in the Connaught Place for rupees 10. Took it with me to England. I was going on a posting, and then we forgot about the idea of writing a book on the Parsis. I and the lady photographer, who was a very famous international photographer, Life and Time and Bombay, Salam Bombay, which I forgot the name of the movie because I'd never seen it, and in the book it is written Masala Bombay, so I need to apologize to her. And it is a book cited on the Persians and the Greeks. It's not a narrative, it's not a book of narrative poetry that this happened and that happened and this happened, as you used to have in the 19th and the 18th century. It is a book cited in an era. That is all I'll say. I don't wish to talk more, and I'll read firstly the last sonnet of the Pasargade sonnets, which is on Cyrus. The Cyrus cylinder was in Bombay. I just saw it recently. And on the great tombstone, it's a huge thing, and it's on the Murghab Valley. Though there was a time when the Iranians were thinking of building a dam there so it would have got submerged. Alexander is supposed to have come and cried there. He actually wept. And the last inscription was that, "Don't grudge me these, stranger, here I lie, the king of the Persians, don't grudge me these few feet of space." There are 9 sonnets. I'll just read the last and go on to possibly 1 or 2 others. The words were ascetic, for they were yours. The offerings were the cords, gems, robes of old. Death, sensually abstemious, bone-dominated, reclining on a couch with legs of gold. The Magi guardhouse came up nearby, stacked with nasal hymns for the soul's good. To keep the fires going, a river of brown shoulders carried frankincense and logs of fragrant wood. And prayers smoked upwards, profoundly intoned by muffled, half-masked mobids who now and then, when flame turned ember, lapsed into a drone. Your words lay simple on the limestone face. Here I lie, Cyrus, king of the Persians. Stranger, don't grudge me these few feet of space. I'll read two or three more. And I visited it in 91. The book was written between 91 and 93. Fortunately, the scholarly book never came through. I'm no scholar and could never have written on the Parsis. I'll read 3 or 4 sonnets from this and very quickly. Number 1. The aura fogged, air ether clean, and lightly breathed the planet's lungs. In all this talk I quite forgot you were around when time was young. I'm addressing Persepolis itself. Bird skeins came in a chain of mail, migratory across the gulf. The wood owl kept a hooting watch on night of ferret and of wolf. They were there, fault line and seam, inbuilt on an empire's flank. Yet years passed by light as a dream's footprint. Dawn wind shook the dew from leaves, poplars flamed in leaf fall cold. Then winter came. Its tone was blue, and winter would mean the invasion of Alexander when, as is well known in history, Thias threw wine and etc., and the whole place went up in flames. And Alexander later explained it that it was a revenge for Xerxes sacking Athens about 200 years ago. 2. Peace and heart smoke wafted long. Even Tartars had turned civilized. This wasn't ever meant to last. A dream's light footfall on the eyes. The poplar leaf may once have flamed, now winds lined up to hack at us. The winds of destiny and change that turned the gold deciduous. The world was jungle and a lair. Harsh myths were scribbled on the sky. The osprey floated in midair. You couldn't track them on the ground. Predator, prey, the osprey kill, bloodied feather, spurt of down, and one more if I have the permission. And this will be one more. These are four sonnets on Firdausi. Firdausi wrote the Shahnameh, and then he was promised by Mahmud Ghazni. His name was Abul Qasim, incidentally, and he was promised a miskal of gold for each couplet that he wrote, and he went on writing, and then instead of the gold, silver was sent. And when he saw this, he gave it to the bath keeper, the public bath, and some to a beggar. And the king was offended, and he was a fugitive for many years. I don't want to go into that. I'll just read the first sonnet out of this and be done. I am fatigued, fleeing one hideout for the next, and I am old, my beard blizzard white. Regrettably, my thoughts are still on gold that the king owed me and paid, but not quite, because he was paid in silver. From Herat to Balkh, his agents are broadcast to snare me. An ordinary poet could have cooked up something, exchanged his face for a mask, donned a beard. But I, who chronicled kings and wrote the great book, how could I be cloaked in anonymity? People would spot great Abul Qasim from his castaway shadow on the road. More's the pity. Sometimes I don't know if I'm far from home or near. Exile charts its own geometry of distances. Friends shun me, informers close in. Where does one go from here? Thank you.
I introduce Rukmini Bhaya Nair's book, Mad Girl's Love Song. I begin with R.D. Lang's observation: if people are schizophrenic, society is schizogenic. The girl in Rukmini Bhaya Nair's novel is not mad. She is just madly in love with English literature, though she is in a Bihar girls' convent. She loves Platt, Blake, Lawrence. Rukmini's engagement with the madness of these three poets is loving, engrossing, and ultimately heartbreaking. Platt's early poem of being upside down in her head, the childless Blake's poems for and on childhood and his involvement with the mystic Swedenborg, and Lawrence's poems on little creatures, namely the snake and the bat, figure prominently. There is also an aborigine, more an original, called Tulu, and an ayah who loves men, the movies, especially Meena Kumari, Palash flowers, and migrant Bhojpuri ditties. मैं क्या खाऊं, क्या पीऊं, क्या लेके परदेस जाऊं. You fall in love with Rukmini's alter ego, the mad girl of the title. It is a growing up tale. It is a tale about life making in strange places. Bihar to us city breds could be Lawrence's Sardinia or Australia, and about being what Rukmini calls a bad Rani, that is, Indian women of privilege speaking English rather than Hindi or Bangla. It is a linguist's examination of language use, as in James Joyce's portrait, where English is examined as a foreign language in Ireland. This is also a portrait of a young girl as detective. She has to find out who killed her mother dressed in her bridal sari and a fur hat, somewhat like the Dalit goddess of English in UP. Rukmini's love of life and language, her feminism and her quiet humor are at play here, and even at 300 pages it is a breeze. A real page turner if you know your poets.
I want to begin by thanking Hoshang for an introduction which made me understand my own book. So I'm very grateful. It was perceptive, it was generous, and in the end, as he said, moving even for me. Now, I think that it makes a lot of sense for people to read poetry. Because poetry is an oral form, it reaches out. But to read prose is an imposition, and I'm wondering whether I should do so at all. I know I'm supposed to read, and I must say, I have to confess, I forgot to bring a copy of my book. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from the book, and as Hoshang told you, it is about our post-colonial love for English. For example, we are holding this whole seminar in English, and this is a problem. It was a problem for me because my English, I acquired my English without knowing that it was not native speaker English, and it took me a trip to England for me to realize that this was not my language. I had believed that it was my language, and I'm in a way working out that trauma in this novel about this young girl who has actually physical schizophrenia. Not physical schizophrenia, she is schizophrenic, and the whole novel has doctor's notes in it. So it's very appropriate that we are reading in hospital today. So I will just read a little book from the beginning of this girl's quest for love, which she's awfully muddled about. And it's called The Return of Ariel. Ariel, it was the name of, Shakespeare's famous character, but also the name of Sylvia Plath's horse. She named her horse Ariel. And and what is the meaning of this symbolism? We will find out. But anyway, here, this is the beginning of the novel. What's love anyway? Sylvia asked on the night of her death, her wide mouth curving. I did not answer her, and then, oh gosh, I don't know how this moves. And then she entered the moonlight, and she died. Who killed her? Who killed my mother? Who killed Jahangir the turkey? You can read the answers in this notebook. Pari's book. Sylvia never looked at me when she asked her questions. Never. But that night, the night she killed herself, it was different. The moon had sharpened her voice, and it drove something into my heart. A stake, she said. Or maybe she said snake. Anyway, I was cold, and Sylvia had no time for me. She was going on a hunt, she said, to set traps for poems. A poem was a beast, she said, a furred, tawny creature in a cage of words. It was a wild mess of scribbles and lines and harsh talon scratches on paper. Now, when people read my novel, they think Sylvia said these things, but Sylvia didn't say these things, and this is the pleasure of writing fiction. You can put words into the mouths of your poets. So this is me describing what a poem is. It's a harsh, it's a trapped creature in a cage of words. But I give these words to Sylvia Plath because I think this is the sense which her poetry has for me. So she says, it was a wild mess of scribbles, Sylvia says in my novel, and lines and harsh talon scratches on paper. Later, the bars would have to be strengthened, the snarling creature tamed, and the poem fitted onto a daytime page where strangers' eyes would come to peer and stubby fingers point. All these things, this bucolic ghastliness, she told me she had schooled herself for. What she could not stand, she said, still not looking at me, was the nothingness. The nights when Daddy or Blake or someone stood there at the edge of the woods and picked off the beasts long before they got to her. On these nights, she said, she felt she was the one being hunted. It was then that her impossible questions came to her, and she'd repeat over and over again in a hysteria of unknowing, what's love? What's love anyway? And just so that I'll read a little bit more, this is the beginning of the novel, and then later on in the chapter, just to give you a sense to this, the tone that I was using now is a very foreign tone. An English person could have written this, because this girl is inside Sylvia's head. But then there's Pari, and Pari has to describe, Pari is this girl, and she has a particular form of madness which is called aviomania. She believes she has wings and she can fly across cultures, across history, a bit like Walter Benjamin's Angel of History. Anyway, this is a change of tone, so I'll just read a few lines. Is that okay? Or are we too? Okay. So, Temki is my town. So this is a town in Bihar. It's called Temki. Temki is my town. It has a level crossing, a girls' convent, and Biscuit Baba's world-renowned meditation ashram. When I came back from England, cured of my madness forever, I heard a story. One of the beggar boys who was always hanging around the ashram had his hands crushed by the Baba's supporters. And the police for trying to steal from the big pile of biscuits they kept in the Baba's tent. So the Biscuit Baba, basically what he does is he gives people Ashirwad and so on for a packet of Parle biscuits. So of course the Baba had no idea what had been done to the boy. He was observing his Maun Rat at the time, and nobody wanted to disturb him. But in the end, the Baba came to know, and he acted at once. He arranged for the boy to have the best hospital care, and when he recovered, both his hands had to be amputated. He was even given a job by the Baba. His job was to guard the pile of biscuits he'd coveted. He had no hands now, so there was no question of his touching the biscuits. And once in a while, the Baba would be extra kind. He'd order someone to throw a biscuit in the boy's direction, for the boy had been expertly trained by the ashramites to catch biscuits in his open mouth, like a dog. Naturally, the boy became the star attraction on Thursdays, the Baba's days for public darshan. When he wasn't catching biscuits and coins in his mouth, this boy never ceased to sing the praises of the Baba until one day, he just ran away without a backward glance and set up his own holy business in Madhepura. That's Lalu Prasad's constituency. This was a story about disloyalty and how hard it is to know the heart of another. I'll stop here. I would love to tell you the rest of this story, but I'll stop here for now. because we are short of time. Thank you very much, and I'll get a chance to read a poem again. Thank you so much.